April 2025, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland embarked on a diplomatic trip to El Salvador, aiming to assess the country's efforts in combating gang violence and to strengthen bilateral relations. During his visit, he met with various officials and, notably, visited a detention facility housing individuals suspected of gang affiliations, including members of the notorious MS-13. The visit was part of a broader initiative to understand the root causes of migration from Central America to the United States. Senator Van Hollen's office stated that the trip was intended to gather first-hand information on the conditions driving people to flee their home countries and to evaluate the effectiveness of U.S. aid programs in the region. However, the trip quickly became a flashpoint in U.S. domestic politics. Fox News reported that White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt criticized Senator Van Hollen's visit, particularly his meeting with a suspected MS-13 gang member, labeling it as a shame on the Democrats. Leavitt argued that such engagements could be perceived as legitimizing criminal elements and undermining the U.S. government's stance against gang violence. The criticism sparked a heated debate about the role of U.S. lawmakers in foreign diplomacy and the optics of engaging with individuals accused of serious crimes. Supporters of Senator Van Hollen contended that understanding the complexities of gang dynamics was essential for crafting effective foreign policy and aid strategies. They emphasized that the senator's visit was conducted with the knowledge and cooperation of Salvadoran authorities and was consistent with diplomatic norms. Opponents, however, viewed the visit as a misstep that could be exploited by political adversaries. They argued that meeting with suspected criminals, regardless of the context, could send mixed messages about the U.S. government's commitment to combating gang violence and protecting national security. The controversy highlighted the delicate balance lawmakers must maintain when engaging in foreign diplomacy, especially in regions plagued by violence and instability. It also underscored the potential domestic political ramifications of international engagements, particularly in a polarized political climate, as the media picked up on Senator Chris Van Hollen's El Salvador trip and his controversial visit to a detention facility housing suspected MS-13 members. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt stepped into the spotlight with a blistering public response. Speaking at a White House press briefing and later in interviews with conservative outlets like Fox News, Leavitt condemned the senator's actions, calling them an outrageous display of poor judgment. Leavitt, who has emerged as a powerful communicator for President Donald Trump's administration, stated, "At a time when Americans are suffering under the weight of border insecurity, crime, and drug trafficking, the fact that a Democrat senator thought it wise to pose with suspected MS-13 criminals is an absolute disgrace. This is not diplomacy, it's delusion." She further accused Democrats of being soft on crime and indifferent to the plight of American families affected by MS-13 violence. Drawing on a narrative that resonates deeply with conservative voters, Leavitt emphasized how the Trump administration had worked tirelessly to combat gang-related crime and fortify the southern border, contrasting this with what she described as the Democrats' careless international photo ops. The Republican backlash didn't stop with Leavitt. Several GOP lawmakers echoed her sentiments. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said in a statement, "This trip is just the latest example of Democrats being more interested in currying favor with foreign officials and criminals than focusing on the needs of the American people." Senator Tom Cotton was even more pointed, appearing on national television to say, "Meeting with foreign governments is one thing, but legitimizing gang members who have terrorized American neighborhoods? That's beyond reckless." Van Hollen owes the American people an explanation. On social media, conservative voices amplified these criticisms. Right-wing commentators and influencers began sharing edited images and video clips of Senator Van Hollen's visit, often highlighting the presence of heavily tattooed detainees, implying that the senator was aligning himself with violent criminals. Hashtags like #ShamefulVanHollen and #MS13 apologists started trending among conservative Twitter users and in Facebook groups. The message was clear. Republicans were seizing this moment to reignite one of their most potent narratives, that Democrats are weak on crime and prioritize foreign interests over American lives. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt's profile soared. Her fierce takedown of Van Hollen was replayed on conservative media channels repeatedly, with pundits praising her for saying what Americans are thinking. The press secretary also took to social media, posting, "While President Trump is fighting for American safety, Senator Van Hollen is shaking hands with gang suspects. Shameful. Political analysts noted that the White House appeared to be using this incident strategically. With the 2026 midterms on the horizon, the Trump administration and its allies were framing the Democrats as out of touch, especially on key issues like immigration and public safety. The Van Hollen episode provided fresh ammunition, and Leavitt, sharp, articulate, and unrelenting, was proving to be a key figure in delivering the administration's message. However, critics of the administration saw the situation differently. Some argued that Leavitt's comments were intentionally inflammatory, meant to distract from other pressing issues such as inflation and ongoing legal battles involving Trump allies. Democratic strategist James Carville said, "This is political theater. Leavitt is performing for the base, not speaking for the nation." But in an era of viral moments and partisan soundbites, her message was getting through loud and clear. While the American media sphere lit up with debate over Senator Van Hollen's trip and Karoline Leavitt's fierce rebuttal, the situation in El Salvador itself revealed a deeper and more complex context. One that continues to draw both international praise and criticism. El Salvador's president, Nayib Bukele, has waged what many are calling the most aggressive anti-gang crackdown in Latin America's recent history. Since 2022, Bukele's administration has arrested over 75,000 people suspected of gang affiliations, particularly from groups like MS-13 and Barrio 18. The move came after a deadly weekend in March 2022, when gang violence surged, leaving dozens of civilians dead in a matter of days. Bukele declared a state of emergency, suspending certain constitutional rights and granting security forces sweeping powers to detain suspected gang members without warrants. Images of masked soldiers rounding up hundreds of tattooed men became viral symbols of his iron fist policy. His strategy drew global attention and sharp division in public opinion. Domestically, Bukele's approval ratings soared. For many Salvadorans, the streets had become safer, extortion had declined, and children could walk to school without fear. International human rights organizations, however, raised alarm bells. Groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International documented reports of arbitrary arrests, abuse in custody, and the detention of innocent civilians caught up in the dragnet. Senator Van Hollen's trip was, in part, an effort to assess the humanitarian impact of this crackdown. He toured the newly constructed mega-prison, a facility designed to hold up to 40,000 inmates, one of the largest in the world. While there, he met with local officials, NGO representatives, and yes, detainees, including one suspected MS-13 member. The senator said the aim was to better understand how U.S. aid and diplomatic partnerships were impacting civil society and human rights on the ground. But context rarely makes for compelling headlines in a partisan storm. Fox News hosts framed the visit as a Democratic lawmaker cozying up to criminals, while more liberal outlets noted the diplomatic and humanitarian nature of the trip. The contrast between these narratives reflected the broader divide in U.S. politics, particularly on foreign policy and immigration. Leavitt and other administration voices didn't dwell on Bukele's popularity or the nuance of his policy. Instead, they leaned into a stark dichotomy. Trump and Republicans stand for law and order. Democrats, by meeting with suspected gang members, do not. Bukele himself weighed in, though subtly. In a tweet that many saw as a jab at Senator Van Hollen, the Salvadoran president wrote, "Some foreign politicians come to lecture us, but we invite them to walk our streets. The people know the truth." Though he did not name the senator directly, the timing was unmistakable. Some in the American political establishment warned against drawing too much from Bukele's authoritarian style. "We can't just applaud leaders for results without examining the methods," said Senator Dick Durbin in an interview. Democracy and human rights are not optional. Nevertheless, polls showed that a significant number of Americans, especially Republican voters, viewed Bukele's crackdown favorably. His unapologetic approach to crime resonated with Americans frustrated by perceived leniency in their own justice system. For the Trump administration, the optics of the situation were a gift. Leavitt and other officials used the moment to reinforce the administration's immigration stance. Stronger borders, zero tolerance on crime, and no negotiation with gang-affiliated entities, foreign or domestic. This growing alignment between the Trump administration's messaging and Bukele's actions abroad hinted at a broader shift. a new model of international cooperation based more on hardline security priorities than traditional diplomacy. As the firestorm over Senator Van Hollen's visit to El Salvador intensified, the American media landscape divided starkly along ideological lines, amplifying already entrenched narratives. Right-leaning media hailed Karoline Leavitt as a rising star in the conservative movement, while liberal commentators defended Van Hollen's intentions, framing the backlash as a politically motivated attack designed to distract from real policy debates. On Fox News, Leavitt's takedown was played in a loop during prime time slots. Hosts like Jesse Waters and Laura Ingraham lauded her for saying the quiet part out loud and refusing to mince words about Democrats' alleged leniency on crime. The clips of Van Hollen visiting the Salvadoran megaprison were edited and spliced with images of MS-13 gang crimes in the U.S., drawing a direct, albeit misleading, connection in the eyes of viewers. Tucker Carlson, now an independent media figure post-Fox, devoted an entire segment on his web show to the issue, titling it, "The Democrats' Dangerous Love Affair with Criminality." He accused Van Hollen of abandoning the American people to pander to globalist sympathies, and praised Bukele's methods as what real leadership looks like. Meanwhile, MSNBC and CNN took a different approach. Rachel Maddow questioned whether the White House was deliberately mischaracterizing a diplomatic fact-finding mission to score political points. "It's a classic deflection play," she said. "They don't want to talk about inflation or the ethics scandals still plaguing Trump world, so they gin up a controversy abroad." CNN featured international affairs experts who stressed that such congressional trips are standard practice, and that dialogue, even with controversial figures or in difficult regions, is essential for informed policymaking. One analyst stated, "You don't solve problems by only talking to people you agree with. That's not diplomacy. That's propaganda." But the discussion quickly spilled beyond the confines of news studios. On platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and X, formerly Twitter, political influencers and meme makers jumped in. Right-wing content creators posted fiery reaction videos praising Leavitt's epic shutdown and calling for Van Hollen to be censured by the Senate. Hashtags like #StandWithCaroline and #VanHollenDisgrace trended throughout the week. Progressive influencers responded with their own campaigns, defending the senator's goals and accusing the administration of manipulating public perception. One viral video spliced Leavitt's statements alongside historical clips of bipartisan diplomatic missions, arguing that Karoline Leavitt either doesn't understand foreign policy or doesn't care to. The public reaction was equally polarized. A poll conducted by Rasmussen Reports found that 62% of Republican voters agreed that Van Hollen's trip sent the wrong message, while only 18% of Democrats thought so. Among independents, opinions were more mixed. 43% saw the visit as inappropriate, while 39% thought it was justified. These numbers suggested that while the story was galvanizing the base, it wasn't necessarily winning over the middle. But in an age of tribal politics, energizing your own side can be more politically potent than persuading skeptics. Inside Washington, the controversy led to heated exchanges on Capitol Hill. During a Senate hearing on foreign aid policy in Central America, Senator Josh Hawley confronted Van Hollen directly, demanding to know, "What message do you think you sent to American families who have lost loved ones to MS-13 violence?" Van Hollen remained composed, responding, "The message I sent is that America leads with its values. We believe in security, yes, but also in justice, due process, and the rule of law." It was a tense moment, one that crystallized the ideological battle lines being drawn around the globe, and within the U.S. Karoline Leavitt continued to make media rounds. She closed one of her Fox appearances with a powerful quote, "You don't fight crime with compassion for the criminal. You fight it with strength and with the will to protect your people." Whether one saw that as courage or demagoguery largely depended on where they stood politically, as the story simmered across the national stage, political analysts began to recognize its deeper significance, not just as a clash between two personalities or parties, but as a glimpse into the defining issues of the 2024 election cycle: immigration, crime, and America's role on the global stage. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance, gearing up for a contentious re-election battle, had already made it clear that law and order would be a central plank of their campaign. In that sense, the Van Hollen El Salvador saga was a gift. It presented a clear visual narrative of the administration's position. Republicans stand with police and strongmen like Bukele. Democrats talk to criminals in foreign prisons. Karoline Leavitt, having effectively used the moment to cement herself as a political force, was reportedly being considered for more prominent roles in the administration's re-election campaign. Her viral rebuttals, especially her declaration that Democrats will negotiate with terrorists but won't negotiate with their own border agents, became a rallying cry among conservative base voters eyeing Trump's next rally in Arizona, a border state on the front lines of the immigration debate. He referenced the incident directly. "Did you see what that guy Van Hollen did? He flew all the way to El Salvador to take selfies with gang members while our towns here are being overrun." And then Karoline, she told the truth. That's what we need, truth tellers, not gang sympathizers. The crowd roared, "And build the wall again." Chants broke out spontaneously in response. The Democratic Party found itself caught in a bind. The trip had been part of a broader strategy to reassert America's moral leadership abroad and present a humane alternative to Trump's hardline tactics. But the optics were damaging. No matter how many press releases or op-eds were issued, the image of a Democratic senator sitting in a Salvadoran prison resonated more viscerally than a policy memo. Democrats attempted to regroup, with several figures like Senator Cory Booker and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defending Van Hollen's actions as brave and necessary in a time of rising authoritarianism worldwide. But even within the party, there was concern about how this would play in key swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, states with large populations concerned about crime and immigration. The bigger picture also included questions about the U.S. relationship with Latin America. Bukele's rise and his growing alliance with global right-wing figures posed a new challenge for U.S. diplomacy. Could America continue to partner with leaders like him, who delivered security but often at the expense of human rights, without compromising its own democratic values? The Trump administration clearly believed it could. In fact, it was betting that voters would prefer tangible results over abstract ideals. For many, Bukele's crackdown wasn't a cautionary tale, it was a blueprint. And in El Salvador, the strategy seemed to be working, at least in the short term. Homicide rates had plummeted, tourism was beginning to recover, and Bukele's popularity hovered around 90%. His government used the controversy as a badge of honor, casting El Salvador as a sovereign nation standing tall against international pressure. In a symbolic move, Bukele's government aired clips from Fox News, including Karoline Leavitt's statements, on national television, declaring them proof that even the world's most powerful country recognizes our success. Back in the US, the media cycle eventually moved on to the next controversy. But the underlying narrative remained, a clear reminder that in today's political climate, every foreign visit, every statement, and every photo op could become a flashpoint in a broader culture war. Karoline Leavitt's rise was now unstoppable. She had seized a moment, crystallized a message, and connected with millions. Whether you saw her as a courageous truth-teller or a divisive provocateur, one thing was clear: she was not going anywhere. And Senator Van Hollen, he returned to the U.S., stood by his decision, and quietly resumed his work in the Senate. When asked if he regretted the trip, he responded simply, "No, we need to see the world to understand it, even when it's uncomfortable." In that moment, the lines were drawn more clearly than ever before, not just between right and left, but between two competing visions for America's future. One defined by confrontation, the other by conversation.